Cold wind blew through the gaps in the planks, cutting at my face like a bone saw. Welcome to the Iron Border, the most notorious lawless land on this continent. There's no champagne drunk by the noble gentlemen of the East Coast here on these sandstorms. Starving wolves. And robbers who kill without blinking. And the ramshackle hut I'm in now is the wedding mansion jointly gifted to me by my cold-blooded brother Maverick and my haughty former fiancée Victoria. The worst trash deserves the worst man. Lincoln. May you and these 3 freaks have children early out in the wilderness. Victoria's sharp, blue-painted mouth still lingered in my mind. As an unlucky guy who had only just crossed over a few days ago, I woke up to find myself stripped of all inheritance rights of the Vance family. Forcibly given 3 city-famous unwanted women as wives, and then exiled here like trash. Lord, this broken window wouldn't even keep out a mouse. A rough female voice interrupted my memories. That was my 3rd wife, Roxy Gallagher, slightly chubby, wearing oil-stained overalls. She was brandishing a rusty wrench, trying to nail a broken plank over the window. In the East Coast high society, she was mocked by the ladies as a piggy girl for her obsession with repairing steam engines, and her rounded figure, huddled in a tattered blanket at Roxy's feet, trembling, was the petite girl who was my 2nd wife, Stella Sterling. She was the abandoned daughter of the Sterling family, born blind, and regarded by the household as a curse that brought bad luck. And in the shadow of the corner, leaning against the wall, and clutching a broken iron sword, was my 1st wife, Harper Blackwood. Half her face was covered by a cold iron mask. She had once been the fiercest cavalry commander on the frontier. She burned the right side of her face saving people in a great fire, and was dumped by her fiancé like a piece of snot. Looking at these 3 women the whole world had abandoned, I sighed and took out the last hard chunk of black bread from my chest. Stop knocking. Roxy, come eat something. I broke off the 3 largest pieces and handed them over, keeping the smallest one for myself. Roxy froze, her dust-smudged chubby face full of surprise. You're not saving it for yourself. Victoria said you were a selfish bastard. Blind woman Stella gingerly felt her way and took the bread, her voice as quiet as a mosquito. Thank you, young Master Lincoln. Master Harper did not move. He only stared at me with that one intact sharp eye, as if looking at a monster who could go mad at any moment. All right. Don't look at me like that. I forced the bread into Harper's hand and gave a wry laugh. Those bastards in tailcoats treated us like garbage and left us here to die. But I, Lincoln, swear that as long as I'm alive, I won't let you go hungry. Harper's fingers trembled slightly. He finally lowered his head and took small bites of the bread. At that moment, the brass pocket watch in my arms made a faint tick. Midnight had arrived. Suddenly, a blinding dark blue light exploded across my retinas, and a cold, mechanical electronic voice detonated deep inside my mind. Ding! Time has reached midnight. Detection confirms the host displayed unreserved kindness toward 3 bonded companions in a desperate situation. Conditions met. Midnight Lord system officially activated. System binding successful. Beginning distribution of novice and companion bond rewards. I clenched my fists. Thank God the Transmigrator's golden finger has finally arrived. The voice in my mind continued to report without emotion. Because you treated the retired Commander Harper kindly. The system rewards 100 boxes of military-grade high-strength compressed rations, complete design blueprints and precision molds set for a high-precision Colt revolver. Because you treated the blind abandoned girl Stella kindly. The system rewards blueprints for a door-die survival water purifier. Because you treated the mechanic Roxy kindly. The system rewards a starter defensive reinforcement materials pack for all-terrain shelters. Command issued. Reward materializing and being extracted. At the very moment that mysterious voice vanished, a dazzling white light suddenly flashed inside the once empty, dilapidated wooden hut. Bang, bang, bang. Heavy, muffled thuds rang out one after another. When the light faded, Roxy let out a strangely pitched scream. And even the usually cold Harper sprang to his feet, the broken sword in his hand clanging to the floor. On the floor before us, stacked as high as mountains, appeared dark green military supply crates out of thin air. I stepped forward and pried open the top wooden crate with my bare hands. Inside, neatly stacked, were enough premium jerky and compressed biscuits to feed the 4 of us for an entire year. Lying on top of the jerky was a scroll of parchment emitting a faint blue glow. And beside it sat a set of hardened steel molds that smelled of machine oil. It was a perfect blueprint for a Colt revolver. In an age still using outdated matchlocks and single-shot flintlocks, this thing was a dimensional downsizing death scythe. Lincoln, where did these come from? Are we dreaming? Roxy rubbed her eyes and shouted incoherently. Although Stella couldn't see, she smelled the food and twisted her hands together in excitement. I picked up the blue glowing schematic of the revolver, turned to look at my 3 wives, and a contemptuous, arrogant sneer tugged at the corner of my mouth. This isn't a dream, ladies. This is the seed money heaven handed us. Through the leaky window I looked toward the East Coast capital. Maverick, Victoria, did you think that by dumping me in this wasteland I'd rot into a pile of bones? No. You're wrong. This isn't my grave. This will be the place I flatten the whole East Coast and build a brand new empire. When the first ray of sunlight pierced the sand-filled sky and entered the dilapidated wooden shack, Roxy's round, chubby face was already smeared with black coal dust. God be my witness, Lincoln. If this set of molds you made isn't a gift from the heavens, then it's the devil's work. Roxy held up a Colt revolver that gleamed with a cold metallic sheen, her fat trembling with excitement. Every single part fits together to absolute perfection. Using that pile of junk iron you had, I actually hammered this out in one night. I took the heavy revolver. The cold grip fit my palm perfectly. In the wooden box beside us, neatly stacked, were the 100 brass bullets Roxy had rushed to produce overnight. In an era when soldiers were still miserably pouring black powder into barrels and had to wait half a minute between shots, this weapon that could unleash 6 rounds in succession was a true dimensional Dropan overwhelming advantage. I picked up a bullet and expertly pressed it into the chamber. With a click, the crisp bite of metal sent my adrenaline surging. Nice work, Roxy. Now, let's see. Before I could finish, Stella, the blind woman who'd been huddled in the corner, suddenly clapped her hands over her ears in terror. Her pale little face went completely bloodless. Horses' hooves. Stella screamed like a frightened rabbit. Lots of them, maybe 30. They smell strongly of blood and the sulfur of burning torches. They're less than 2 miles away, coming at full speed. I froze for a moment. Although Stella was blind, depriving her of sight seemed to have gifted her with terrifyingly acute hearing. It's the Sand Dog Gang, Harper, who had been silent until then, suddenly said. The once iron-blooded commander sprang to her feet, the one remaining eye flashing with a hungry, wolf-like ferocity. Those bastards who eat people on the border must have seen the white light we put out last night and come to raid us. Harper wasted no time and immediately switched to wartime mode. She kicked over the heavy log table to block the door, then spun and shouted at Roxy. Fat girl, use those boxes of military rations to board up the back window. Stella, hide in the fireplace, and don't come out no matter what you hear. I have to admit, the ruthless way this woman commands in battle really appeals to me. Bang! A violent gunshot sounded outside. A rusty lead bullet tore through the wooden door and lodged deep in a roof beam. You, the worthless trash kicked out by the family. Listen up. A hoarse, grating Drake-like voice shouted arrogantly from outside the door. I'm One-Eye, boss of the Shag Dog Gang. Open the door nice and easy. Hand over the treasure you hid last night, and those 3 worthless stinking bitches to amuse my brothers. And I might be merciful, maybe I'll chop off your limbs and spare your dog's life. I peered through the gap in the door. 30 ragged, reeking bandits sat astride gaunt, bony nags, brandishing obsolete matchlock guns and rusty curved blades, grinning as they surrounded the cabin in a ring. Harper, how long do you think this door will hold? I spun the cylinder of the revolver and asked with a cold smile. At most 10 seconds. Those bastards have a breaching axe. Harper gripped the broken sword, eyes fixed on the gate. It won't take 10 seconds. I took a deep breath and slammed my foot into the log table being used as cover, kicking it aside and yanking open the door. The raiders clearly hadn't expected the prey inside to come out and throw themselves at death. The one-eyed man froze for a moment, then erupted into a burst of mad laughter. Ha ha, brothers, look at this idiot. Bang. A deafening gunshot tore through the morning silence. I didn't give him a chance to finish his nonsense. I raised my hand and fired. A scorching bullet instantly blew apart the one-eyed man's ugly head, and reddened white fluid sprayed the face of the thug standing behind him. Boss is dead. Kill him. Load the powder. The bandits erupted in terrified shouts, fumbling as they began stuffing powder into their outdated matchlock guns. Load. Go load it in hell, you scumbags. I held the gun with both hands and, like a merciless grim reaper, pulled the trigger repeatedly. Bang, 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 bang. 5 successive blasts, the muzzle spitting out half-meter-long tongues of lethal fire. In this era when cold weapons and early firearms coexisted, 1 shot for 1 kill, this uninterrupted barrage of firepower was entirely beyond their understanding. 5 bandits who were about to raise their knives and charge had blinding blooms of blood erupt from their chests, tumbling off their horses like torn sacks. The devil. He's holding the devil's weapon. The remaining bandits completely collapsed. They dropped their arms and, terrified, turned their horses to flee. Harper, barricade the door. Don't let a single one escape. I shouted, rapidly pressing bullets back into the scorching gun chamber. A flash of fanatical shock crossed Harper's one eye. She surged out like a she-leopard. The broken sword traced a ghostly arc through the air and severed the throats of 2 bandits trying to run. In less than 3 minutes, the battle was over. 30 demonic bandits were now corpses on the ground. The acrid smell of gunpowder and blood hung in the air. I blew on the white smoke rising from the muzzle of my revolver, kicked a corpse on the ground, and turned to look at the 3 women standing under the eaves. The wrench fell from Roxy's hand, her mouth open wide enough to fit an apple. Stella leaned halfway out from the fireplace. She couldn't see, but she could smell the strong scent of death in the air. As for Harper, she looked at the gun in my hand and then at the corpses littering the ground, and her tense shoulders relaxed for the first time. Listen up. Ladies. I slid the still-hot revolver into the holster at my waist, pointed at the blood-stained, desolate land, and spoke in a low, powerful voice. From today on, this land is no longer a lawless place. Its name is Vance. Whoever comes to bother us will meet this fate. After wiping out that gang of sand dogs bandits, our reputation spread across the wasteland, for a whole week after. Not a single panting stray dog dared come within a step of our cabin. Food and safety are temporarily secured, but another, more deadly problem is tightening its grip on our throats' lack of water. The sun at the border is so fierce it could bake stones. Roxy, being curvy and spending every day hammering by the makeshift blacksmith's forge, looked like she'd been hauled out of the water. But to save the only half bucket of cloudy well water we had left, she refused to drink more even when her lips cracked and bled from thirst. Stop working, Roxy. I walked over and shoved that half cup of water into her oil-stained hand. If you keep pushing yourself like this, you won't finish the machine'll turn into jerky first. Roxy looked at me and her eyes instantly filled with tears. In this world that prized slenderness and a sickly pallor as beauty, her slightly plump figure had always been dubbed pig-like by those high society bitches. But if we don't have stronger fortifications, what if next time it's a regular army? She sniffed hurtfully. I only know how to tinker with this junk. I don't want to be a useless burden. To hell with being a burden. I reached out and wiped the black soot from her face, looking at her seriously. On my territory, a machinist who can build a repeating firearm is 1,000,000 times sexier than 100 noble misses who only know how to dance at balls. You're not fat, you're practically the most beautiful genius I've ever seen. Roxy froze. Then her round face flushed bright red and tears started to fall. Plip-lop, as the half glass of water in her hand spilled. At that moment, the hands on my pocket watch jumped again to midnight. Ding. Detection. Host has developed deep psychic resonance with bondmate Roxy, completely shattering her inferiority complex. Reward. Massive critical bonus. The system issues special industrial rewards. Full blueprint set for industrial-grade planetary gear steam pump. One ever-wearing mithril core bearing. Additional enhanced agricultural reward. 10,000 gene of polar drought-resistant rapid growth extraordinary wheat seeds. The voice in my head had barely finished when a blinding blue light exploded on the anvil in front of Roxy. A precision mechanical bearing the size of a watermelon, emitting an alluring silvery sheen, materialized out of thin air. Beside it lay a thick stack of parchment blueprints and piles of linen sacks heaped like small hills. Roxy didn't even bother wiping her tears. She threw herself onto the bearing as if a dragon had found a peerless treasure. Heavens, she inhaled sharply, her chubby fingers trembling as they stroked the bearing's exquisitely smooth surface. This craftsmanship. The tolerance is definitely no more than 0.01 millimeters. Lincoln, with this blueprint and core, give me enough scrap metal and I could pump the lava out of hell itself. Then get to work, my genius mechanic. I grinned. There's plenty of material. The wheel hubs, scimitars, and rifle barrels from those 30 bandits are all yours. For the next 3 days, Roxy worked like a tireless maniac. With Harper's help, we threw every scrap of metal we could find into the furnace. Roxy swung her hammer, forging the weapons that had once been used to kill into massive pipes, heavy gears, and sturdy boilers. Evening of the 4th day, a steam pump as huge as an iron monster stood firmly in the dry riverbed in front of the cabin that had been parched for 10 years. Thick iron pipes plunged dozens of meters deep into the ground. Add fuel. Light it, Roxy shouted excitedly. Her face streaked with soot. I shoved the last dry stick into the boiler, and the flames leapt up in an instant, as the water in the boiler began to boil. The system-rewarded mithril bearing started spinning like mad. Kuch kuch kuch. A huge mechanical roar echoed across the wasteland. Immediately afterward, a teeth-grinding sucking sound came up from deep beneath the ground. Bang! A thick column of water like a bucket suddenly gushed out of the outlet. At first it was yellow mud being expelled, but in just a few seconds the muddy water turned into clear, transparent, slightly cool, sweet underground water. Water. It's water. Stella, the blind woman who had been quietly standing by, excitedly spread her arms wide, letting the cool spray fall over her. The flow fanned out wildly along the parched riverbed, and the cracked earth emitted greedy sucking sounds. I didn't waste time. I immediately hoisted the bags of wheat seed awarded by the system and, together with Harper, charged into the waterlogged wasteland and began frantically sowing those 10,000 gene of seed. A miracle happened right before our eyes. The seeds called extraordinary wheat burst through the soil the moment they touched moisture. In just a few hours, the wasteland that had been a yellow zen expanse turned into a sea of green wheat at a speed visible to the naked eye. By the next morning, the seedlings had grown to half a person's height and produced golden ears so full they looked ready to burst. 10,000 acres of fertile farmland sprang up overnight on this borderland that had been labeled barren. I picked a heavy ear of wheat, rubbed the golden kernels out in my hand and popped them into my mouth. The rich wheaty aroma instantly filled my mouth. With automatic weapons, with an inexhaustible water source, and now with enough grain to feed 100,000 people. I turned my head and looked toward the distant eastern coast. Maverick, my good brother, did you think leaving me here was to let me starve? No, you have given me an independent kingdom not governed by anyone, with limitless potential. Our counterattack is only just beginning. In a borderland where even the bone fragments of the living get chewed up, the 10,000 acres of golden wheat rippling with an enticing scent, and that steam water pump that day and night spouted cool groundwater, were like the brightest lighthouse in the dark. In just a week, over 1,000 drifters had gathered at the edge of our territory. They were ragged, as thin as a horde of the walking dead, squatting on the farm's outskirts with pleading eyes, staring at us like hungry wolves, though no one dared cross the line I had drawn. Those 1,000 pairs of eyes glowing green truly made your skin crawl. We can't drive them off. Harper stood with his arms folded, looking through the window at the crowd outside. The territory needs to grow. You need cheap labor. And you need soldiers to take the bullets. I think so too. I took a pull from the crude tobacco roll, but I'm not interested in being a babysitter with a whip. This lot is a scattered mess right now if they run into Achable's regular troops. One cannon shot and they'll piss themselves and run. Harper turned around, her half-intact face expressionless, the remaining half still hidden under a cold iron mask. As long as you give me an infinite supply of black bread and jerky, an absolute power over life and death, 3 days, and I'll shape this muddy lot into a wolf pack that tears everything apart. Seeing her sharp lone eye, I suddenly remembered a treasure I'd tossed into the system's storage and left to gather dust, before forming a wolf pack. The Wolf King can't keep wearing this suffocating iron shell. I stepped in front of her and, to Harper's stunned gaze, reached out and grabbed the edge of her mask. Don't touch. Harper recoiled like a cat with its tail stepped on. Her voice edged with panic and pain. Down there. It's ugly. Even my exfiance, that bastard, would puke if he looked. He puked because he's a blind fool. I gave her no chance to evade. With a little force, I tore off the rusty iron mask. Beneath the mask was a face half destroyed by fire-pitted. Dark red scars writhed across her right cheek like a centipede, looking utterly grotesque. But to me, it was the battle scar of a veteran who had once guarded the border. I didn't flinch. From my pocket I took the bottle of extreme healing elixir the system had rewarded me on the first night. Pulling out the cork, I dabbed the jade-green liquid little by little onto those horrific burned scars. Heavens, it itches, Harper gasped. A miracle happened again, under the utterly unscientific, domineering potency of the system's elixir. The dead skin on Harper's face began peeling off rapidly. In less than 2 minutes, those grotesque scars melted away like snow under the sun. When the last scab fell, even I couldn't help whistling. It was an exquisitely cold, strikingly sculpted face features so three-dimensional they could be a classical Greek statue. The martial bearing honed by years in the military, combined with the now jade-like pale skin, gave her an irresistibly lethal, wildly seductive charm. Harper walked to a cracked water jar, stared at her reflection in the water, and 2 lines of tears ran down her perfect cheeks. But she quickly wiped them away fiercely, turned to me, and there was a new, unwavering fanaticism in her eyes. From today on, my life belongs to you. Don't put it like it's such a big deal. What would I do with your life? I stubbed out the half-smoked clay pipe on the ground with my foot. Change into clean clothes and go outside to pick your pack of wolves, officer. 10 minutes later, Harper had changed into a tight black leather armor, a second Colt revolver that Roxy had just made hanging at her waist, and strode out of the cabin. Her breathtaking beauty and the cold-killing aura instantly silenced the 1,000 refugees outside. Who wants to live? Who wants meat? Stand up. Harper's voice wasn't loud, but it cut through everything. Among the crowd, a few of the toughest-looking, brutish thugs exchanged glances. One burly man with a scar on his face swaggered forward. Well, hey, where did such a pretty little thing come from? I can feed my belly no problem, but tonight you'll have to keep me company. Bang! Before his filthy words finished, his head exploded like an overripe watermelon. Harper didn't even blink. Smoke still curled from the muzzle of her revolver. She stamped on the headless corpse with her boot and swept her gaze coldly across the scene. Any more problems? The entire scene fell silent. All the refugees were terrified by this utterly unreasonable show of force and the unfamiliar rapid-fire weapons, and they all simultaneously fell to their knees in the mud. Now, listen to my rules. Harper raised his voice. Those who swear allegiance to Lord Lincoln will receive clean water every day and a pound of jerky. Anyone who dares step back or tries to cheat, this is what will happen to them. That afternoon, Harper selected 100 of the strongest, fiercest-eyed men from among the 1,000. These men were gathered together and issued 100 revolvers, and ample ammunition rushed out overnight from the Roxy Armory. The remaining people were organized into farmers and construction workers and began digging trenches and building wooden palisades around the perimeter of the territory. In just 3 days, 100-man personal guard, absolutely obedient, fully armed, and named by Harper the Reaper Guard, was formally formed. Watching the guards outside, desperately practicing drawing and firing under Harper's lashes, I smiled contentedly. In this era when everyone was still lining up to load black powder guns, My 100 rapid-fire revolvers were enough to turn any East Coast heavy cavalry into a pile of cindered coal. My stake was getting bigger and bigger. Day by day our territory swelled like it had been pumped full of hormones. When the first batch of precocious super wheat was harvested into he newly built massive granary. A group of uninvited guests whose scent of decayed perfume I could smell with my eyes closed finally arrived at our door. That noon, a whirlwind of yellow sand suddenly rose around the outskirts of the territory. 50 family knights clad in silver-hardened steel armor, mounted on tall warhorses, escorted a gilded, jade-inlaid luxury carriage and arrogantly stopped in front of the trench we had just dug. The carriage door opened, and Victoria Thorne stepped down wearing an ornate lace gown and holding a lace parasol. She looked at the refugees working nearby, pinched her nose in disgust as if merely breathing the air here would infect her noble lungs. "Lincoln, you good for nothing. Why don't you hurry out and kneel to greet me?" Victoria's voice was shrill like a duck with its neck stepped on. She walked up to the resting guard detachment, sneered from above, then kicked over a large iron cauldron of rich meat broth boiling beside them. Hot soup spilled everywhere, releasing an enticing aroma. I sauntered out of the cabin, a straw of wheat between my teeth. "Well, if it isn't my gold-digging ex-fiancée," I sneered at her. "Did you travel all the way out to this godforsaken place just to kick over my pot? Have the East Coast aristocrats gotten so poor they can't even buy manners anymore?" A twitch passed over Victoria's face. She had come expecting to see me skin and bones, kneeling and begging her. But instead she found me flushed with health and even with a pot of good meat that the East Coast rarely gets to eat. Cut the tough guy act. Victoria pulled a moldy piece of bread from her sleeve and tossed it at my feet like feeding a dog, a charity-like sneer on her lips. "This is from Master Maverick, and while we're at it, let me see have those 3 uglier Thampigs wives of yours already starved to death in some stinking ditch. Kill them." The heavily armored knight captain behind her drew his long sword and shouted arrogantly, "Level this illegal structure to the ground." 50 heavy cavalrymen immediately raised their lances, ready to charge. To their eyes, armored cavalry wiping out a few peasants was nothing short of a one-sided massacre. "Roxy, teach these country bumpkins a lesson." I didn't even turn my head. Just snapped my fingers. "Got it, boss." On the roof of the wooden house's second floor, Roxy ripped off a grubby camo tarp. Beneath the tarp was the terrifying killing machine she had hammered out last night from the system's blueprints, and scrap iron a hand-cranked Gatling gun with 6 thick barrels, in an era when musketeers still queued up for firing squads. This thing was nothing but a pure Death Reaper. "Feel the wrath of the Industrial Revolution, you grandchildren," Roxy cried, excitedly turning the side crank. Rat-a-tat-a-tat-a-tat. Deafening metallic roars tore through the air in an instant. Long tongues of fire spewed from the 6 barrels, and brass casings as thick as a baby's arm rained down on the roof like a waterfall. The 50 arrogant heavy cavalrymen hadn't even gotten 10 meters out when their proud steel armor was shredded like paper under the concentrated storm of bullets. The warhorses let out harrowing screams and toppled to the ground. In just 10 seconds, the land outside the territory was turned into a hell of blood and gore. The few remaining riders who hadn't been hit were so terrified they wet themselves, threw down their weapons, fell to their knees in the mud and frantically begged for mercy. The machine gun ceased its roaring, and the air was thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder. The lace parasol slipped from Victoria's hand and fell to the ground. Her powdered face was now as pale as a corpse, and her legs trembled as if sifting grain. You think a few gimmicky firearms can change the fact that you're a useless piece of trash?" Victoria still clung to a dead duck's stubbornness, pointing and screaming at Harper, who had just walked out of the room. "Look at your wife. A disfigured monster wearing a broken mask. Scum like you are forever only fit to rot with such low-life freaks." The next second, Harper sneered. Under Victoria's stunned gaze, Harper casually brushed the short hair fallen across her forehead aside, revealing a face without any scars stunningly beautiful and radiating a chilling murderous aura. That face was 100 times more beautiful than Victoria, who lauded herself as the most beautiful woman on the East Coast. Before Victoria could react, Harper's figure flickered, and like a black leopard she lunged to stand before her. Crack! A single, extremely loud and forceful slap landed hard on Victoria's face. Victoria screamed. Her body like an empty sack flung 10 meters, crashing heavily into the mud. The few gold-edged teeth mixed with blood and were spit out. Harper walked over unhurriedly, his military boot mercilessly stomping on Victoria's noble blonde hair, pressing her face down hard into the muddy water. Click! Harper drew the Colt revolver at his waist. The cold muzzle pressed directly against the back of Victoria's skull, a smile of utterly frigid derision curling at the corner of his mouth. "Open your damn eyes and see clearly on Lincoln's territory. Filth like you isn't even fit to clean our toilets." I looked at Victoria, curled up in the mud and trembling, terrified and incontinent, stepped forward, and with my toe kicked up her moldy piece of bread. "Strip all the supplies, horses, and valuables off their carriage." I turned to the captain of the guard and gave the order, then looked down at Victoria from above. "Spare her a dog's life. Go back and tell Maverick this is only the beginning. Have him clean his neck and wait for me at the estate on the East Coast." after Victoria drove that cartload of shell-shocked, urine-soaked remnants back to the East Coast. Our territory entered a period of explosive growth. The 10,000 acres of extraordinary wheat brought in a bumper harvest. The golden grain filling Roxy's 3 newly built giant granaries to the point of bursting. But looking at that much grain enough to buy half the royal capital, I couldn't make myself smile. The road's terrible. I sat on a sofa stitched from mutated buffalo hide, rubbing my throbbing temples. From our lands to the nearest inland trade hub, Blackstone City, it was a full 500 li. The rutted trade route was nothing but 1 meter-deep mud pits, hauling grain by cart. It was eaten by the beasts pulling the wagons before even half the load made it. Stella, the blind woman, came up behind me and gently pressed her soft, cool hands to my shoulders, though she couldn't see. She always sensed my mood most keenly. Don't worry, Lincoln. Even if we brew all this wheat into lousy beer and dump it in the trenches, as long as we're together, it's no big deal. Her gentle voice was like a spring breeze. I turned my hand over to hold her small palm and kissed it. You're right, baby. A living person can't be killed. Click. The pocket watch's ticking sounded especially clear in the midnight silence. The system's mechanical and wondrous voice arrived as promised. Ding. Detection. Host successfully crushed the humiliation from the ex-fiancée. Greatly defending the dignity of the 3 partners. Territory reputation has reached the fearsome across the land level. System has granted an epic infrastructure reward. 100,000 tons of high-strength alloy rails with an extraordinary magnetic auto-splicing inscription. Complete blueprints for a Land Overlord-class heavy steam locomotive, and its perpetual core engine. My eyes instantly lit up like 2 1,000-watt searchlights. Good heavens, this system really understands the saying to get rich, build roads first. When the 100,000 tons of rails, flashing with a cold, eerie light, appeared out of nowhere on the empty ground behind the territory like a mountain of steel, even normally unflappable Harper inhaled sharply in surprise. Harper, wake up your 1,000 well-fed, idle citizens, I shouted excitedly. Roxy, take that engine to the smithy by dawn. I want to see a steel monster that can pull 100 cars. That frantic night was later called the Night of Miracles by the chroniclers of this continent, thanks to the system's built-in magnetic auto-joining inscriptions. Laying railroad tracks required no spikes or surveying. All you had to do was toss 2 rails weighing several tons onto the ground, and with a crack they'd bite together in a faint blue light, fitting perfectly and even automatically avoiding impassable boulders. 1,000 well-fed, full of energy settlers, under the supervision of the Death Guard, pushed eastward like crazed ants. A 500-li stretch of road, under the blessing of this law-defying system, was completely opened through in a single night. When the first rays of morning sunlight fell on the walls of Blackstone City, the soldiers defending the city witnessed a scene they would never forget. Woo! A piercing and wildly ferocious whistle tore through the morning fog. A heavy steam locomotive, forged entirely from thick black steel with a massive ram mounted on its prow, belched dense black smoke. Like an iron beast charging out of hell, it roared along the straight tracks and, at a speed terrifying for this age, came to a halt outside the gates of Blackstone City. The huge steel wheels ground against the rails, throwing up a shower of dazzling sparks. Behind the locomotive hung 50 cars fully loaded with extraordinary wheat. Roxy poked her oil-smudged face out of the cab, excitedly patting the massive steam boiler. I stood on the roof, twirling a revolver in my hand, looking down at the city guards on the wall who were so frightened they couldn't even steady their muskets. In less than half an hour, the richest merchants of Blackstone and the city lord were crawling and scrambling out. Seeing that outrageously high-quality wheat and this iron behemoth they couldn't possibly understand, their mouths were practically watering. Master Vance? The city lord wiped the cold sweat from his brow, his voice trembling. These grain supply, how do you intend to sell them? The price of grain doubles. Buy it or don't. I jumped down from the roof and coldly laid down my terms. Also, from today on, this railway linking the border and the interior belongs exclusively to me, Lincoln Vance. Anyone who wants to move goods into or out of the border must pay a 30 toll, and it will be subject to my mood. Several merchants looked distressed and were about to bargain, when Harper and 10 soldiers from the Reaper Guard drew their revolvers with a neat click as they cocked them. No problem. Absolutely no problem. Praise your great railway. The city lord and the merchants swallowed all protest in an instant and nodded frantically. I looked at the steel dragon stretching off into the distance and curled my lips into a cold smile. With this main artery, I not only completely monopolized border trade, but more importantly, my steel armies could at any time ride this track and flatten the entire East Coast in a single night. While my 500 liling steel artery delivered heaps of gold back to my territory every day, my good brother Maverick over on the East Coast finally couldn't sit still. 3 days ago, Maverick invoked the Family Elders Council and, together with the Iron Cross financial group that controls 70% of the East Coast's economy, issued a full blockade against us. Harper slapped a wanted notice sealed with red wax onto my mahogany desk. She is now not only my commander of the Royal Guard but also my chief intelligence officer. They're not only forbidding any merchants from selling us gunpowder, pig iron, or cloth. They're even crazily dumping inferior grain inland, trying to drive prices down to the floor so the wheat we grow turns into a pile of rotten junk in the warehouses," Harper said coldly. I leaned back in the leather chair, blew out a thick cigar ring, and couldn't help laughing. "Trying to starve me out with economic warfare." I flicked the ash. "Is that pig Maverick's brain full of moldy cheese? Compete on production with a OP transmigrator like me?" The chime at midnight struck on time, as if answering my derisive laughter. Ding. Detection. The host is facing an economic dimension strangulation by hostile forces. Triggering reverse harvesting mechanism. System issuing apocalyptic level economic aid. Spatial fold. Infinite granary blueprint unlimited volume. 1 million tons of high-grade purple wheat with trace constitution enhancing effects. As that pleasing mechanical voice fell in my mind, a blueprint glowing with a purple light drifted onto my desk. Outside the territory, the air over the vast open ground began to writhe violently. Immediately after, that 1 million tons of premium purple wheat revered as an aristocrat-only tonic appeared from nowhere like a golden waterfall. If Roxy hadn't acted with quick hands to activate the spatial fold granary, that wheat would have buried the entire territory alive. My God. Roxy, who had just walked into the office, stared at the bottomless space grain silo outside the window. The wrench in her hand clattered to the floor. Lincoln. 1 million tons. That's enough to starve the entire East Coast 3 times over. Starving them would be too cheap. I stood up, stubbed my cigar into the ashtray, a cruel capitalist gleam flashing in my eyes. I'll use this wheat to blow a hole in Maverick and those tycoons' underwear. Roxy, add 200 cars to that steel behemoth. Harper, arm the guard and escort the train. Tonight, we make a big score at the East Coast doorstep. The next morning, the giant steam train I had named the Midnight Oligarch, hauling mountains of top-grade purple wheat, thundered through Blackstone City and brazenly came to a stop outside Gold Flow City, the heartland controlled by the Iron Cross tycoons. When the freight car doors opened, that rich, intoxicating wheat aroma unique to purple wheat instantly enveloped the whole city. The black bread the Iron Cross conglomerate sold to civilians, laced with sawdust, was priced at 10 copper coins per pound. As for me, I had a huge wooden sign hung beside the train. Lincoln Lord's Special Supreme Purple Wheat. Only 1 copper coin per pound. Unlimited supply. We accept only gold, wrought iron, and gunpowder. They went mad. The entire Golden Flow City instantly went insane. The normally aloof tycoons and executives watched helplessly as tens of thousands of civilians, and even their own guards and servants, surged toward our train like a tidal wave. In the face of a million-ton terror and prices that felt like a dimensional reduction strike, any commercial tactic was a laughable struggle. In just 1 week, the dumping frenzy called the Purple Gold Storm swept across the entire East Coast. The common people eat purple wheat every day, which strengthens the body who would still buy those moldy scraps from the conglomerates. The grain in the dozens of giant silos of the Iron Cross conglomerate has completely rotted into fertilizer nobody wants. The conglomerate's cash flow snapped instantly. Those minor vassal families and speculators who had once sworn loyalty to Maverick, in order to pay their debts, turned on him one after another, pushing carts of gunpowder, high-quality steel and crates of gold coins, kneeling like dogs in front of my train, begging for some purple wheat to cover their shortfalls. Report. Young master. In the luxurious manner of the Vanes family on the East Coast, a servant trembled all over as he knelt before Maverick. The Iron Cross conglomerate is bankrupt. The 10 million gold coins our family invested are now worth less than toilet paper. Crack. Maverick crushed the goblet in his hand, red wine mixing with blood dripping onto the expensive carpet. His handsome face was now contorted like a demon. Meanwhile, I, far away at the border, was lying in an office floored with whole gold bricks, looking at the ledgers filled with almost countless zeros and at warehouses piled high with gunpowder and pig iron. Economic warfare. No, this was a one-sided slaughter. Now I have money, food, and an endless supply of steel and gunpowder. Next, it will be time to show this continent what a real war machine looks like. When the economic edifice came crashing down, the gamblers who had bet everything bloodshot could only overturn the table. The noble plutocrats of the East Coast and my good brother Maverick finally tore off their last masks of hypocrisy. They emptied the family's last copper coin and cobbled together an unprecedented 100,000-strong regular coalition army. That morning, a shrill alarm ripped the silence above the territory. I stood atop the high watchtower, watching that dark, surging flood of steel on the horizon. 100,000 soldiers clad in heavy armor, accompanied by a full 300 black-mouthed muzzle-loading redcoats of cannon, like a cloud of death, surrounded our lands without a gap. 1,000 to 1. Harper stood beside me, both hands gripping a pair of finely rifled revolvers, the bloodthirsty glint flashing in her one eye. Even if my Death Guard's barrels melt from firing, they can't kill 100,000. Lincoln, take Stella and Roxy and catch the train first. I'll cover the rear. Spare me, my goddess of war. I smiled and pressed her shoulder, sliding an unlit cigar into my mouth. In this age that values industrial firepower, charging with human wave tactics only proves they're a bunch of unevolved monkeys. Ahead of the line, the Allied commander, the so-called fiercest general of the East Coast. The bloodhound butcher rode back and forth arrogantly on an armored warhorse in front of the artillery positions. Lincoln Vance, you bastard exiled by your family. He amplified his voice across the battlefield with a loudspeaker array. In 1 minute, my 300 cannons will turn your territory, and those ugly wives of yours into mince. Fire! At his command, 300 artillerymen ignited their fuses simultaneously, just as those hundreds of deadly iron balls screamed across the sky. The huge workshop behind our territory, the one Roxy had covered with heavy black cloth for 3 whole days, suddenly erupted with a violent roar loud enough to shatter eardrums. Boom, crack, crack, crack. The workshop's giant iron doors were smashed from the inside by a terrifying force. In the choking dust and the thick white steam of high-pressure vapor, an 18-meter-tall Titan-class heavy steam mecha, forged entirely from dark gold and pure black high-grade steel, like an ancient iron demon, thundered onto the battlefield. This was the ultimate battle reward the system issued last midnight to deal with the 100,000-strong army, driven by that micro-nuclear fusion steam core. Roxy used the tens of thousands of tons of steel she had offloaded to assemble for me this killing machine that belonged only in nightmares. Bang, bang, bang. Hundreds of enemy shells slammed into the mech's heavy armor. Yet not a single white mark was left, like a bunch of ridiculous toy balls being knocked aside. I sat in the cockpit in the mech's chest, watching the Allied soldiers below so frightened they dropped their torches through the holographic periscope, and spat out the cigar in my mouth, like bullying the many over the few. Fine, I'll show you what I can do. I slammed the control stick down. 8 giant exhaust pipes on the back of the 18-meter-tall mech blasted out scalding white high-pressure steam. This steel behemoth, weighing several thousand tons, charged into the center of the 100,000-strong army like a black meteor at a terrifying speed that completely defied the laws of physics. This was pure dimensionality reduction strike. I didn't even need to use the rotary barrel auto cannon mounted on the mech's arm. I merely controlled the beast as it ran rampant across the battlefield. Those 5-meter-long steel war boots crushed dozens of fully armed heavy infantry into mush like stepping on an ant nest with every landing. The massive mechanical legs swept casually, and a dozen or so red-clad cannons were kicked up into the air and torn apart like scrap iron. Monster. It's a monster from hell. Help. The morale of the 100,000-strong army collapsed completely the moment they made contact. Soldiers screamed as they threw away their swords and muskets, frantically fleeing like headless flies, even trampling each other in the scramble to save their lives. The commander, who had just been shouting arrogantly, "Bloodhand," was now desperately whipping his warhorse, trying to flee this slaughter field. "Run, you fat pigdo, you think you can outrun my engine?" I snorted coldly and bent the mech's legs sharply. Driven by nuclear steam power, the massive body leaped more than 10 meters high, and its huge shadow instantly engulfed the fleeing commander. "No, I'm from the East Coast." His desperate, agonized scream had barely sounded before it was completely drowned out by the thunderous crash when the mech landed. Pfft. The mech's 100-ton steel right foot, as inevitably as night follows day, came down on him and his warhorse. There was no spray of blood, only a dull sound of bone and flesh crushing. That arrogant Allied commander was simply flattened into a 2-dimensional meat pancake pressed tight against the ground by the enormous weight. I straightened the mech's torso and opened the speaker on its chest. That thunderous voice echoed across the trembling wasteland, reaching the ears of every fleeing enemy. "Go back and tell Maverick to scrub his neck clean and wait for me. First thing tomorrow, my Iron Army will go knock on the door of the East Coast." I've never been one to leave vengeance for the next day, since an army of 100,000 has already been trampled into muck. This storm fused from high-pressure steam, and the heat of revenge must blow all the way to the end of the East Coast in one go. "Roxy, push the train's boiler to its limit. Harper, have your death guard swapped to incendiary bombs." I sat in the cockpit of the Titan mech, pushing the engines to full output. The 18-meter-tall steel beast let out a roar that pierced the skies and, following the railway straight inland, charged toward the East Coast like a bulldozer. 3 in the morning, Vance City, the East Coast's most prosperous metropolis. The city's nobles were hosting an extravagant masked ball. To them, 100,000 troops crushing some border loser was merely trifling conversation over their drinks, until the violent tremor of the earth shattered the crystal chandeliers in every banquet hall. Rumble. A steel wall 30 meters high crumbled like a brittle cookie before my Titan mech. I kicked the gate to pieces, and a shower of bricks and stones rained down on the nobles, who screamed and fled in terror. I ignored the small fry and strode straight into the Vance family's central manor in the heart of the city. There stood a luxurious villa, built to the design of a palace at the cost of 10 million gold coins. Through the huge floor-to-ceiling windows on the second floor, I saw my good brother Maverick. He was wearing expensive silk pajamas, clutching a chest full of gold bars, preparing to flee through a secret passage. "Where do you think you're going, brother?" The mech's gigantic steel hand shot out, and like crushing a chick it directly smashed the villa's dome, accompanied by a screech of metal tearing and tumbling masonry. I ripped that ornate roof clean off into midair. Moonlight poured unreservedly into what had been a lavish bedroom. Maverick collapsed in the rubble in terror. Gold bars scattered everywhere. In that instant, a strong smell of urine spread from the crotch of his expensive silk trousers. The mech's chest hatch opened, and I slid down the rappel rope, landing squarely on that priceless Persian carpet. Lincoln. Maverick crawled to me using hands and feet, clutching my boot desperately, snot and tears streaking his face. I was wrong. I'm your brother. The financiers forced me into this. The headship of the Vance family belongs to you. All this gold is yours. Don't kill me, I beg you. Seeing the noble young master who once kicked me to the border like trash and looked down on me now licking the soles of my shoes like an old dog, I suddenly felt utterly bored. The head of the family. Do you think I still care for that stinking little plaything of a title? I kicked him aside, slipped the revolver back into my waist. Killing you would be a waste of my bullets. Harper. A long string of train whistles sounded outside the manor. Harper rushed in with a fully armed guard. Chain this weakling up, and chain all those city nobles who suck blood every day. Throw them into the coal cars of the train. I coldly pronounced judgment. The border is in the middle of a big infrastructure push. We're short 1 million slave miners. Let them spend the rest of their lives atoning in the sunless pits. Maverick let out a desperate scream. But it was quickly silenced when 2 guard soldiers smashed his teeth with the butts of their rifles and dragged him out like a dog being pulled to its death. When the first rays of morning sunlight fell on this luxury estate reduced to ruins, my 3 wives came to my side. Roxy excitedly measured the estate's stainless steel sculptures with a tape measure, muttering how many hundreds of cannons the material could be remade into. Harper still wore a stern face, but her one eye looked at me with burning adoration. And the blind woman Stella leaned gently on my shoulder, breathing the morning air free of gunpowder. It's over, Stella said softly. No, darling, this is merely the end of an old era. I stand on the ruins atop the manor, arms outstretched, overlooking the city I have utterly subdued. On the horizon, 100 smoke-belching steel dreadnoughts reward the system just granted are plowing through the waves. From today on, all that damned aristocratic bloodline and that laughable chivalry can roll straight into the dustbin of history. My voice carries through the mech's loudspeakers across the entire East Coast. This continent is ruled now by steel and gunpowder. Truth exists only within the range of my cannons. I am Lincoln Vance, once a worthless outcast, now an industrial emperor. The fall of the East Coast was only the beginning. The following 3 years were called the most frenzied age of steel this continent had ever seen. Within the artillery range of my Titan mech and 100 dreadnoughts, all the kings, dukes, and self-important mages learned what courtesy and unconditional surrender meant in less than 3 months. Now, let us turn our attention back to that once godforsaken frontier wasteland. Clang, clang, deep within the No. 5 black coal mine, 800 meters down. A man caked in coal dust and as thin as skin and bones was laboriously swinging a pickaxe. The hands that once only wore silk gloves were now covered in sores and calluses. Quit dawdling, slave No. 7. A burly Halfric overseer snapped as he cracked a whip across the man's back. If you don't dig 1,000 pounds of coal today, you'll go eat sour gruel with that stinking bitch who cleans the mine's toilets. Why wise? Yes, I'll dig right away. Lord Maverick, once supremely noble, let out a piercing scream and, like a dog, crawled on the ground frantically scooping up lumps of coal. Beside the nearby sewage outflow, Victoria, dressed in a rancid coarse cloth dress with hair like a bird's nest, was lugging a foul-smelling wooden bucket, retching as she scrubbed the toilet furiously. She didn't even dare let out a sound of crying now, because if a tear fell into the toilet and dirted the floor, she would have that single sand-laced black bread taken from her. Watching the miserable state of these 2 old enemies of mine on the holographic monitor, I exhaled a satisfied smoke ring and casually shut off the display. My current desk was no longer in that rickety hut, but on the top floor of the Tower of Truth, the highest point of the Empire's capital, the city of the Iron Dome, looking out through my huge floor-to-ceiling window. The whole world had been completely transformed. On what was once a wilderness, dense grids of alloy rails like a spiderweb covered the entire continent. Thousands of heavy steam trains day and night belched white smoke, transporting billions of tons of material. In the sky, heavily armored zeppelins developed by Roxy blotted out the sun, and farther along the coast, a peerless fleet of 100 dreadnoughts was preparing to set sail to conquer the new continent across the ocean. Your Majesty, the Empire's Royal Army 1st Armored Division has finished assembling. With your order, we can level the Elven Forest in 3 days. Harper, wearing a sharply tailored black Imperial Marshal uniform, strode into the office. Her stunning face still carried an aloof coldness that warned strangers to stay away, and at her waist hung the golden revolver I had crafted for her with my own hands. Now, no man on this continent dared to look straight at her one sharp eye, because she was not only the most beautiful woman in the Empire, but also the Reaper commander who held 3 million fully armed soldiers in her hands. Let the elves crawl over here and sign labor contracts themselves weary short on tree-planting green hands right now. I waved a hand and turned my gaze to Roxy, who was sitting on the carpet frantically sketching schematics. This girl who used to be mocked for her size is now the Empire's chief mechanical minister. She even led a new aesthetic across the continent now if anyone dares say being scrawny is attractive. The zealous populace will immediately throw them into the river to feed the fish, because only a full-figured, strong body like Roxy's deserves the title Mother of Industry. Don't bother me, Lincoln. I'm designing the hydraulic system for the second-generation mech. If you're off by 0.1 millimeter, I'll toss you out the window, Roxy shouted at me without looking up. In the entire Empire, only she dared speak to me like that. I laughed and shook my head, and just then the pocket watch emitted a long-missed click. Ding. Detected that the host has completely unified the continent and established the industrial empire. Ultimate bond quest completed. System issued final redemption reward. Miracle grade optic nerve regeneration potion. My breath stopped instantly. Over the past 3 years, the system had given me countless world-shattering weapon blueprints, uncountable gold and food, but what I had always longed for finally arrived this midnight. I hurried to the soft sofa by the window and knelt on one knee in front of Stella. She sat there quietly, fingers tracing a recently cultivated mutant rose. What's wrong, Lincoln? Although she couldn't see, she immediately felt my pounding heart. I said nothing. I simply pulled the stopper from the vial and gently let that drop of liquid brilliant like a star fall into her grayish eyes. A warm golden light flashed. Stella uttered a faint, soft sound. Then the veil that had covered her eyes for over 10 years began to fade away like morning mist driven off by sunlight, revealing eyes more beautiful than the purest sapphire. She blinked in bewilderment, and tears sprang to her eyes. The first time those eyes focused, they saw my face smiling with tears. You're just as I imagined. She reached out with trembling hands, gently stroking my cheek, her voice choking. No. You are more like a real king than I imagined. I held her tightly in my arms and turned to look out the window at my vast steel empire of gears and roaring steam. I'm more than a king. I kissed her forehead lightly, watching the sun slowly rise over the Pacific. From now on, I am the truth of this new world. Wait, don't click away. There's an extra chapter. In the 4th year of unifying this continent, I finally understood what they mean by it's lonely at the top. Once, my daily pleasures were blowing enemy walls to dust with cannons, or watching tons of gold pour off trains. But now, I sit every day at the golden desk on the top floor of the Tower of Truth, signing off on nothing but this kind of nonsense. Report on the Northern Elf Clan's application for an additional 300 steam-powered combined harvesters to increase the yield of magic tree fruits. To hell with the magic trees, approve it. Let them pay back with bark. I threw my gold pen onto the desk and tugged at my tie in irritation. Peace is truly a maddening thing. Is the system down too? Of course there was no response. Ever since Stella's eyes were healed, that system that only produced black tech had gone completely dormant like Santa Claus who'd finished his job and retired. Lincoln, you look like an unfulfilled maiden trapped in her boudoir. Roxy kicked open the bulletproof glass door of my office. She wasn't wearing those oil-stained overalls today. Instead, she had on an extremely sexy floral slip dress. I have to say, this full, strong, heavy industrial figure like hers is the Empire's current trend. Pack up, honey. Stella said she wants to see the sea. So I built a civilian RV suitable for a family trip. Roxy waved the half-meter-long hydraulic wrench in her hand excitedly. 20 minutes later, I stood in the palace square, staring at the civilian RV in Roxy's mouth and fell into a 5-minute silence. It was an 800-ton steel behemoth fitted with 8 off-road tracks and a faintly blue nuclear fusion exhaust spouting from its rear. Most absurd of all, 2 300mm heavy naval guns were mounted side by side on the roof. You call that an RV? I pointed at the 2 gun barrels thicker than me, my mouth twitching uncontrollably. One shot from that thing could blast the East Coast back to the Stone Age. You need something for protection on a trip, don't you? Roxy said, patting the armor with righteous confidence. Enough talk, it in. Harper and Stella are already waiting for you in the onboard heated pool. As it turned out, once you own a tracked warship powered by nuclear energy, the world has no such thing as a detour. All the mountains, forests, and even several abandoned old city walls along the way were simply crushed flat by the RV, which also happened to save the Empire a fortune on blasting rock for its highways. We arrived at the Golden Sand Beach, once belonging to the East Coast magnate, and now listed as royal private property. Around dusk, the sun was setting in the west, and the sea breeze was cool. Stella wore a pure white long dress and stood barefoot on the soft sand. Ever since that vial of miracle-grade optic nerve regeneration elixir healed her eyes, she had developed a feverish fascination with the world's colors. Now she had propped up an easel and was briskly capturing the sunset glow on the horizon with her brush. Lincoln, your taste used to be truly terrible, Stella said as she mixed colors, turning to look at me, a mischievous light flickering in her sapphire-bright eyes. I was sorting through the old clothes you used to wear on the border yesterday, me goodness. A red jacket with green cargo pants. Were you trying to disguise yourself as a mutated Christmas tree? That's called post-apocalyptic wasteland style, baby. I walked over and wrapped my arm around her waist, kissing her on the cheek. Besides, back then we were so poor we couldn't even get a meal. Who cared if the colors matched? Just as we were enjoying the cozy moment, a teeth-grinding clank of mechanical gears came from beside us. I turned my head and nearly fainted. Harper, the Empire's supreme commander and deathly leader of 3 million troops, was now wearing an outrageously hot black bikini that showcased her perfect abs and icy charisma, but strapped to her thighs were 2 tactical holsters holding finely chambered golden revolvers. Not only that, she was directing several automated tracked robots, frantically deploying 30 rotating barrel Gatling gun towers with thermal target acquisition systems around the beach. Harper, we're on vacation, not storming Normandy. I helplessly pressed my hand to my forehead. Safety first. Your Majesty, Harper said coldly, pushing up the tactical sunglasses on her nose. I've already locked onto the air defense systems for this stretch of sea. If any seagull dares to shit over your parasol, it will be turned into mincemeat by 300,000 rounds in 0.1 seconds. Rumble splash. No sooner had she finished speaking than the calm sea suddenly heaved up a wall of water dozens of meters high. A deep-sea mutated giant octopus, the size of a small mountain, with over a dozen thick tentacles and reeking of filth, roared as it burst out of the water. Its enormous shadow instantly shrouded our beach. It looked like it had taken us for a tasty dinner. Oh, seafood delivery to the door. I instinctively reached for the gun at my waist, but there was no chance for me to act, daring to disturb this old lady watching the sunset. Stella was still sitting at the easel, not even lifting an eyelid, looking for death. Harper snorted coldly. He didn't even draw his gun. He pressed the tactical terminal on his wrist. Da-da-da-da-da-da. The 30 Gatling gun towers on the beach instantly spewed out tumterlong tongues of furious flame. Dense depleted uranium armor-piercing rounds swept toward the poor octopus like a metallic storm. At the same time, Roxy excitedly poked half her body out of the RV's cockpit. Take my 300mm iron fist. Boom, boom. 2 heavy high-explosive naval guns roared out, striking precisely the octopus's huge head. The poor deep-sea overlord didn't even have time to let out a single scream before it was torn apart in midair into several thousand pieces of fully cooked grilled squid tentacles, intermixed with the smell of roasted meat. Falling onto the beach as evenly as rain, Stella calmly lifted the drawing board to block a few splashes of seawater, then quickly added a few strokes of red paint to the painting for an explosion of brilliant color. Now the composition is perfect. That night, we lit a bonfire on the beach. The whole family sat around the fire, holding grilled octopus tentacles thicker than our thighs and drinking chilled dwarf dark beer, listening to the waves lapping the shore. Watching Roxy and Harper bicker over who could fire more accurately, Stella leaned on my shoulder and watched it all with a smiling face. I took a sip of cold beer and let out a long sigh. No scheming. No survival crises. Having the fiercest firepower and enjoying the utmost tranquility. This kind of plain, unadorned, and monotonous retirement life belonging to an industrial magnate actually seems pretty nice. Wait, don't click away. There's an extra chapter. I am Harper. I sat in that black leather swivel chair symbolizing the Empire's highest military authority, and slowly slapped the still smoking golden revolver I held down onto the table. My booted foot rested on the meeting table crafted from a single slab of obsidian as I looked coldly down at the barbarian chieftain who had been spouting off moments before. Bang! A yellow dam round, trailing the acrid smell of gunpowder, skimmed the scalp of that northern barbarian chieftain with pinpoint accuracy, and finally embedded itself deeply in the pure titanium alloy wall behind him. The entire Imperial High Command's conference room fell instantly silent. You just said your barbarian warriors would never bow to a woman. I narrowed my revolver-clitted left eye. My voice was as cold as a December icefield. The barbarian chieftain, over 2 meters tall and all knotted muscles, was now slumped on the carpet with his legs going weak. His ridiculous wolfskin hat had been blown off by my bullet, and cold sweat streamed down his forehead like a waterfall. No, your marshalship. I drank too much just now. He stammered and begged for mercy. In his eyes, besides fear, there was also a damned, nauseating flicker of astonishment. I frowned with disgust. I have no patience for the babble of you uncivilized monkeys. I stood up and smoothed the sharp black and gold Imperial Marshal uniform on me. Go back and tell your tribal king, before sunset tomorrow. I want to see his handprint on the Empire's labor contract. Otherwise, at dawn the day after tomorrow, my 1st Armored Division will plow your grasslands into ground fit for planting thalmic wheat. Get out. Watching that group of envoys flee the conference room like startled rats, tumbling and scrambling, I sighed and irritably undid the disciplined clasp. Peaceful times are really boring. If Lincoln hadn't forbidden me from casually using weapons of mass destruction, I honestly would have liked to blast that idiot's skull into a rotten watermelon just now. I walked to the huge full-length mirror on the conference room wall and looked at myself. A neat crop of black hair, flawless snow-white skin, perfect features that exuded a chilling, lethal beauty you couldn't meet Hedon. Now the whole continent was singing the praises of the Empire's death flower. Those bored aristocratic poets had even written hundreds of long odes to extol my face. But they had no idea that before meeting Lincoln, This face had been the most disgusting nightmare in the world. I couldn't help reaching out to touch my left cheek. It had once been burned over a large area by high-level fire magic. The flesh curled up like a piece of charred rotten meat. Back then I was like a stray dog discarded by the world, wearing a tattered mask, fighting with rats for food in the gutter. Everyone called me a monster, an ugly freak. And even my so-called family treated me as a rusty tool that could be thrown away at any time. Until that day, in the leaky old wooden shack on the border, that man, that young master universally regarded as a good-for-nothing across the entire East Coast, casually lifted my mask. There wasn't the slightest fear, disgust, or pity in his eyes. He simply smeared a tube of cool ointment all over my face, then shoved a heavy revolver into my hand. From today on, you are my Lincoln Vance's sharpest knife. If anyone dares call you ugly again, you use this gun to shatter his skull. That night, the man called Lincoln not only reshaped my face, he also personally ignited a nuclear reactor inside my long-dead soul. Ding! The personal tactical terminals alert interrupted my memories. It was a message from the guard. The Merfolk Kingdom delegation from the Southern Seas has arrived at the Tower of Truth and is meeting His Majesty. The Merfolk Kingdom. I raised an eyebrow. That group of mutated fish with scales on their lower bodies that like to sing on the reefs to seduce sailors. I heard they're here this time to use their so-called South Sea's most beautiful princess to marry into the Lincoln family, in exchange for our empire's deep-sea submarine technology, a marriage alliance. I snorted, grabbed the cap from the table, snapped it onto my head, and strode out of headquarters, trying to climb into Lincoln's bed. They should check first whether they can withstand a 120mm armor-piercing shell. When I rode the hovercar back to the palace and kicked open the door to the top-floor office of the Tower of Truth, the sight before me made my hand instantly go to my holster. Lincoln was sitting on the sofa, a cigar between his teeth, helplessly flipping through a set of blueprints. In front of him, a woman wearing a few pitiful shells and whose lower body had already transformed into human legs though still bearing some reflective scales, was doing her utmost to rub her breasts against Lincoln's arm. Your Majesty, the girls of our merfolk are much gentler than those crude women at your side who only know how to fight or grease their hands. The fish cooed, even attempting to reach out to touch Lincoln's face. Lincoln's peripheral vision landed on me standing in the doorway. He immediately stopped, even recoiling a little, looking at me with an innocent, "Wife save me, there's something dirty here" expression. Where's that fishy smell coming from? Have the palace sewers clogged again? I said coolly, my combat boots clicking on the titanium floor with a crisp tat-tat. The so-called most beautiful woman of the South Sea turned her head, scowling at me. Who are you? How dare you? Her words died in her throat. The beauty she prided herself on, upon seeing my face, dimmed like a cheap glass trinket placed beside a priceless diamond. The pride in her eyes shattered, replaced by a deep jealousy and inferiority. I walked up to her and looked down at the still quivering woman. Click. I didn't waste words. I drew the golden revolver and the cold barrel unceremoniously pressed against her forehead, even leaving a red mark on her brow. You just said who is a coarse woman who only knows how to fight and kill. I bent slightly and whispered in her ear, my tone as gentle as if passing a death sentence. I heard mermaids have strong healing abilities. I wonder, after having their head blown off by a 4 or 5 caliber magnum, can they still grow a new one? Ah, help. The green tea princess instantly went limp on the ground. Her face drained of color as she burst into tears. Your Majesty, save me. This madwoman is going to kill me. Lincoln finally stood up, slowly. He walked over to me, didn't glance at the woman on the floor at all, but casually put his arm around my waist and planted a kiss on my cheek. Sorry, Your Highness. Allow me to introduce, this is my wife, the Empire's Supreme Commander, Harper Vance. Lincoln held a cigar between his teeth and said with a smile, by the way, in our house the wife handles the finances. You just insulted her. About submarine technology. You'll have to come back for that in your next life. Throw that pile of seafood out for me. If she's still within the capital's limits 10 minutes from now, drag her straight to the kitchen and make sashimi of her. I ordered the guards outside coldly. A few fully armed soldiers immediately hauled the still screaming princess out like a deadweight dog. The office finally fell silent. Your formidable wife. Lincoln flatteringly took off my military cap and ruffled my short hair. I knew you wouldn't let other women take advantage of me. Don't start that. If you had dared let her touch your face just now, I swear I would have blown your head off along with hers. I rolled my eyes, but the corner of my mouth couldn't help lifting slightly. At that moment, the lounge door opened. Roxy came out carrying a platter of roasted meat, and Stella followed with a pot of black tea. Harper, can you be more careful before you shoot next time? That wall you blew up in the conference room yesterday, I spent 10,000 gold to fix it. Roxy complained as she bit into a skewer. Stella smiled gently. All right, Roxy. Harper was just trying to protect Lincoln. Come have some tea. I just brewed a new calming floral tea. It will help with Harper's tense nerves. Watching these two women who could command storms outside but nag at home, I shook my head in helplessness. This is us. The three of us. So different in personality and often bickering. are bound together by the same man, in front of this man called Lincoln. Roxy is the mechanic who keeps his heart beating. Stella is the healer who soothes his soul. And I am the Empire's most merciless, deadliest Fong. Anyone who wants to hurt this family will have to step over my dead body first. Late at night, having washed away the smell of gunpowder and my fatigue, I wore a loose silk nightgown and gently pushed open Lincoln's bedroom door. Roxy was in the underground lab doing blast tests, and Stella was already asleep. The room had only Lincoln in it. He was leaning against the headboard, using the bedside lamp's warm light to read a geography book. Hearing me come in, he put down his book and patted the space beside him. I walked over like a black panther finally returning to its territory, shedding the cold, hard disguise of the day and obediently slipping into his arms. His chest was broad and warm, carrying a faint scent of tobacco and his unique personal fragrance. My hand gently stroked an old scar on his shoulder. It was from the border had been cut by Maverick's killer while protecting me. "What are you thinking about, my war goddess?" he murmured, lowering his head so his chin brushed my hair. "I've been thinking, was I too impulsive today?" I closed my eyes, listening to his steady heartbeat. After all, I'm the Empire's marshal. Pointing a gun at the delegation's princess might cause a diplomatic incident. To hell with diplomatic incidents. Lincoln gave a light chuckle and tightened his arms around me. I've built so many cannons, forged such a great empire, if I can't even let my own wife throw a tantrum freely in the palace, then I'm a pretty pathetic emperor. He lowered his head and kissed me deeply. The kiss was domineering and fiery, instantly burning away all the defenses of my reason. "Harper, remember," he whispered in my ear, his voice low and magnetic. "You don't need to worry about anyone. If the sky falls, my mechs and artillery will hold it up for you. You just need to do what you love, and always be my woman." I hugged him tightly, burying my face in the hollow of his neck. In the darkness, my one eye gleamed with utter madness and tenderness. "Of course, my king," I silently vowed in my heart. "As long as there's one bullet left in the chamber of Harper Vance's gun, as long as my heart still beats, no god or demon on this continent can shake the throne that belongs to Lincoln Vance. I will use the blood of every enemy on this continent to pave for you an eternally crimson red carpet." And that's a wrap, folks. If this story gave you that sweet dopamine hit and was more satisfying than peeling the plastic off a brand new TV, do me a massive favor. Obliterate that like button and hit subscribe. I'm locked in the content mine, serving up fresh, ridiculously satisfying stories every single day. See you tomorrow for your next fix.